17 away from 7. It was the biggest foregone conclusion in politics this year, and I'm not talking about interest deductibility for landlords. I'm talking about Chloe Swarbrick becoming Greens Party co-leader alongside Marama Davidson, and we're talking both topics with our fortnightly panel of Chloe Swarbrick and ACT Party leader David Seymour. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
And congratulations, Chloe.
Thank you.
We expected this, but have you had many congratulatory messages from across the House?
I mean, yeah, my phone has been blowing up for the last 24 hours, so apologies to those who I haven't yet been able to get back to live on air this morning. But yeah, I feel deeply grateful, and as I said yesterday, you know, I see this opportunity and this role and this platform and this privilege right now to hold the mirror back out to New Zealand and to say, actually, as I've said the whole time that I've been doing this gig, I think it's really important that New Zealanders realise that they are the ones who are in power and that they are the ones who get to decide actually what happens outside of actually the general election cycle of every 3 years. So to the point of kind of the things that the government's getting on with, if people feel a sense of disenfranchisement or despair about that, that they need to be rallying and organising and mobilising right now to ensure that we get the best possible outcomes for all New Zealanders.
There has been, in terms of your message to your supporters at the weekend, I'm a little bit concerned this morning that there was a little bit of mudslinging between you both. So was there anything that either of you said that you regret or that you wanted to rephrase, or you feel comfortable with everything you said?
No, I very rarely do.
Okay.
And I gotta say, I've been debating David since I was 22 years old, and of late, you know, he's made comments about the way that I say certain things, about my smile, and most recently he's taken issue with the fact that I really love evidence, but I'd really like to talk about the things that I am saying and the evidence that I'm talking about, and the kind of vision that both of us have for the future of this country.
Well, I know that it's actually good humour.
Well, those things are untrue. I haven't actually ever...
I can give you the receipts. I've got records.
I've never criticised a politician's appearance. That's simply untrue.
You said on that couch over there about a year ago that I will say nice things with a nice smile, but that what I have to say is dangerous. So again, I think that was explicitly quite about my appearance, nonetheless.
No, it absolutely was not. I said, you know, it sounds good if you say it smiling, but you've got to look back through the details. And that's not a question about the person or their appearance at all. It's a challenge that there has to be substance. And what I've said consistently is that, you know, you can say things that sound good, that are well practiced. Chloe is a talented politician with some amazing political attributes that many politicians would like to have. But my challenge is you can't continue running this line that someone somewhere has done too well, and if only we rise up and take it off them, we'll be a better place.
Let's get into that.
That's not a way forward.
What did you make of being referred to as a bully boy government, or bully boy behaviour, rather? Well,
first of all, I mean, you know, it's that kind of sloganeering, it's personal attacks, and it's kind of gendered language, which I didn't think you'd get from the Greens. They're usually against that. But what I would say is that, you know, you've got to actually come up with the examples. What this government has done so far has removed a large number of policies that were not using taxpayer money very well, that place restrictions on what people can do with their property, and actually made the system a lot fairer, so that we have an opportunity to get through a big economic crunch that's coming this year, and then start rebuilding a society where more kids are going to school, where it's safer to be on the street, and where people can actually have a hope of staying in this country. Because one of the biggest stories of the last few years is the number of New Zealanders that have voted with their feet and left. That's what we've got to get stuck into.
So let's talk about those priorities. I mean, just yesterday the government announced, and David himself fronted the fact that with interest deductibility returning, the government is prioritising the better part of $1 billion going into landlords' back pockets during this ostensible cost of living crisis. This is happening in the backdrop of reports from IRD and Treasury last year, which showed us that the top 311 families in this country hold more wealth combined than the bottom 2.5 million New Zealanders. It's not an accident, it's a consequence of a tax system that sees those at the top pay an effective tax rate less than half of that of the average New Zealander.
Okay, so let's get into
those extremely wealthy people, right? Do you think that that's what landlords are? Because if you're saying that money's going into their back pocket, it could be your average mum and dad that, you know, own a little investment property to try and get their kids ahead.
And this is what I mean by demonising people, and this is what I mean by the politics of envy. That's my challenge to Chloe, is to stop doing that. But there's a few other points. Look, any other business, anything else you invest in, if you invest in a commercial property and rent out to a shopkeeper, you can deduct the mortgage interest that you pay against your taxable income. So the real challenge is, why did the previous government decide to put more taxes onto the one thing that people really need, which is a residential rental market? And then they say, oh, it's going into the back pockets of landlords. Well, actually, ultimately, it's paid by the renter. It's just like tobacco taxes. You know, it's the dairy owner who actually pays. Hang on, it's the dairy owner who actually pays the tax. It's a tax on them, but the cost is paid partly by them and partly by the customer. And that's what I mean by having a more rational.
There is no evidence. There is no evidence that rents will go down as a result of what the government announced yesterday. And the facts are that this policy will cost, i.e., it will deduct from forecasted government revenue approximately $1 billion, which could be spent on other things. To my point around the tax system, we also saw that one of the many reasons that Labor possibly moved ahead with this interest deductibility is because they themselves had ruled out implementing the likes of a capital gains tax. The facts are, the evidence is, Oxfam tells us that we have the 136th tax system in the world for reducing inequality. Look, if we want to fix our public infrastructure, we have a $100 billion deficit at the moment. We need to bite the bullet, and we need to be willing to have grown-up conversations outside of the 3-year political cycle. And that's exactly what I'm asking for us to be grown-ups in our parliament and to say what is necessary to get these things happening.
The truth is, everyone in parliament's a grown-up and everyone's on a 3-year political cycle. But I actually want to come back, I'm sorry, but there's something else Chloe said, and she says it repeatedly on this show, that the wealthiest taxpayers are paying half as much tax as the average. Yeah, effective tax. And you know what that means? It means if you take somebody's paper profits, i.e. if you own a house and the value goes up, then that is counted as income for the year. So if you were to take that seriously, then every time someone's house went up, we would have to tax them. Now, we're not seriously suggesting that you're going to pay income tax on your house price going up. That's how they've tried to say that people who have investments are paying less tax, because they don't pay tax on their paper profits every year. And it's frankly totally disingenuous, it's totally untrue, and it's another thing that Chloe repeatedly says that is designed to set people against each other. It misinforms, and you should stop saying
that. I would invite people to go and look at the research, because it's just
I've described how that research works.
David, the interest deductibility is not going to be back paid, which was something that in the coalition agreement you had agreed with the National Party. Is that a broken promise to you?
Not really. I mean, you know, if you look at what it says in black and white, yes, there should be 60% mortgage interest deductibility this year. This means that you'd end up getting a little bit back, because it would be 60 instead of 50 for the tax year we're in right now. But what's important is that we're going to 80% on the 1st of April, 100% from the 1st of April next year. And that means that we've gone far faster at restoring mortgage interest deductibility, giving relief to renters and landlords alike, than we would have under Labor. And actually, the government's policy is closer to what ACT campaigned on than what National campaigned on. So, you know, it's a big win for those renters, for those landlords, and for people who supported ACT.
It sounds like you've made a bit of a compromise there, though. So have you been promised anything in that negotiation to compensate for the fact that you've actually had to go back on something that was in the coalition deal?
No, and it's really interesting. You've
got nothing out of that.
It's so interesting the way you put that, because I think one thing that people want from politicians is people who A, can be really truthful, and B, people that can actually say, look, sometimes it's not the best idea to do this right now, we're going to do something different. Sit around the table, talk with your coalition partners and come up with a better answer. And what we said is, look, you know, the 60% now, it's going to be very complicated, you're going to have to back pay people. It's not actually a big difference from where we are now.
So it was ACT's decision?
Oh yeah, like, we didn't have some massive fight about it. I mean, people have tried to play it that way, particularly the Herald, who reported it quite strangely. However, in our view, where we've got to is a much better deal than we would have got otherwise. It's simpler than it would have been to backdate. And in terms of the amount, I mean, sure, 10% is 10%, but we're going to 80% from the 1st of April.
Okay.
It's going to cost the better part of $1 billion. There is absolutely no guarantee that these will flow on to savings for renters. And once again, we're also going to see the further commodification of our housing market, which could put up housing prices.
Here's another thing to get straight. It doesn't cost. The government doesn't have money. It takes money off New Zealanders. So when you say it costs, what you're really meaning is that the government is going to take less money and take less money out of residential rental housing. So there's actually going to be a better market for renters.
We're talking about forecasted revenue. That's just how government books work.
Do you say that this is definitely not a scenario which is going to now happen, which is that first home buyers are going to turn up to a house, an open home, and they're going to be up against people who are kind of 50 plus, made a bit of money, done a bit of life, and can now afford to go in and get an investment property, and it's much more attractive for them now, and it's going to be harder for those first home buyers. Can you say that that is not going to increase?
But we know that that happens now. We know that it happened 10 years ago, and we know that it will happen in 10 years' time. The effect of this tax may be that people pay less rent and they show up to that open home with a bigger deposit because their rent was lower and it was quicker to save. And this was always the problem when Jacinda Ardern came out and said, we're going to tilt the market towards first home buyers. What she forgot is that she was putting a tax onto renters who, of course, are renting because they want to buy their first home. So, these things, when you add it all up, can cancel each other out. However, what is important is that, first of all, we're going to treat residential property the same as any other business or investment. And I think consistency in the tax policy, in the tax system is good, simplicity is good. Second of all, the government is not going to be doing a tax grab out of residential housing, which is exactly what renters need.
I want to just focus on another couple of issues to finish. You're looking at cutting back on waste in a number of different areas, and most recently we've heard about a review of the school lunch program and where waste can be cut back there. Andrea Vance, she's written an opinion piece in the Sunday Star Times about MPs' perks. Chloe, do you think that needs to be reviewed as well?
Sure. I mean, we do have an independent authority that goes through them. I think that the kind of court of public opinion is oftentimes a pretty good place for MPs to check themselves on those kinds of entitlements, for lack of a better word. But yeah, I mean, it's been the case that for the past few decades, the kind of trajectory of change has very much been towards people expecting that politicians don't get undue entitlements. But I think the reality as well is that we have to be as much as we can everywhere across the country. So as much as we can be enabled fairly and justly to do that makes sense.
Yeah. How about yourself, David?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always up for just about anything that might save the taxpayer money at this point, because I can tell you it's going to be a tough year economically. I don't think people have fully processed that yet. It's going to be a tough year for the government putting together its budget. But I also just make the point that, when people talk about perks, they're mostly talking about stuff that was got rid of a long time ago. The reality is that, you get a place to stay in Wellington, you get, your flights, you get your taxis, and you get, home internet and a printer, basically, because you've got to work at home.
So it's largely stuff to do your job.
And I just take the point I'd make is that, most workplaces in New Zealand, and I know there'll be people sitting at home saying, well, I'm an exception to that, but for the most part, you actually have to, how do you put it, have an employment contract where you don't pay your own money in order to do your job. And that's pretty much where it is. So, real open to saying, well, hang on, can we, reverse that or whatever? There may be something around the edges. But in terms of perks, I mean, I know I'm a dead man walking for trying to fight this corner, but there's not as much as you might think.
Just finally, I don't want to make this, it's not about me. I know there is a lot of
personal experience.
But you got a $180 taxi and you want to know what we're going to do about it.
Totally. I didn't actually take the taxi because I wouldn't jump in a taxi that was going to take me cost me 180, especially when
that's the power of your dollar.
Usually 40. But do you think that there was regulations taken away from the taxi industry in 2017. Do you think it's perhaps gone too far that now taxis can charge that?
Well, I mean, it turns out they can't because you didn't get in it.
But that's because I live locally, Somebody who doesn't live locally doesn't know what it's meant to cost, or someone from overseas might have jumped in.
Yeah. Look, I mean, you're always open to changes, but then you think through practically what would you do to have someone out there inspecting them and checking and so on, and chances are the really bad ones are going to evade that anyway. So, you know, if there's a suggestion about what could be done about it, we'll definitely look at it. But I suspect that, you know, at the end of the day, politicians could make a lot of promises, and the truth is that there's going to be some dodgy people out there, but there's also a lot of businesses that are prepared to put their brand on the roof. They're protecting their reputation, and they won't rip you off because they want you next time. And I would say that's the overwhelming majority of the industry. If they're not prepared to stand by their brand, then maybe, you know, don't get in or don't pay. Well, actually pay if you get in, though.
I want to give you just a quick...
I'd just say, really briefly, frankly, it's embarrassing that we don't have a functional public transport system in our largest city in this country. We're supposed to be world-class when it comes to this stuff, and this goes back to my earlier point about how we do not have a tax system right now that enables us to pay for the necessary public infrastructure that all of us should expect, and that deprives people of options. When you want to talk about freedom of choice getting around.
I love that my taxi on Saturday night has come back to tax policy.
It all does.
At Party Leader David Seymour and Green Party co-leader Chloe Swarbrick. Chloe Swarbrick, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I was just about to say, I just called her co-leader, and then I thought, she is. Okay, that's all right.